Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Congregation L'Dor Va-Dor's Chat with Two Rabbis. We have Rabbi Zvi Kahn and Rabbi Barry Silver. It's Tuesday evening, March 2nd, and we're going to march into spring. So take it away, gentlemen.
All right, Sharon, it's always good to hear your mellifluous, joyous, upbeat voice. It's great to be on with everybody else too, and especially with Rabbi Kahn. And with our visitors, thank you very much. And I just got really good news. I had to take a call right before I went on. I'm scheduled to perform a wedding in Guatemala. And I'm going out there later this month. Don't get alarmed, Sharon. I'll do the Shabbat services before. Anyway, so Francine says, you know, my passport expired. Didn't yours expire too? So I said, oh, I didn't really think of that. So I checked my passport. I said, yeah, you're right, it expired. So I called up Miami to get a renewal. They said, there's no appointments available like for 3 months. And I said, well, they said, we can check somewhere closer. So they checked Atlanta, New Orleans, Arkansas. There was nothing. But I happen to have a relative who is in the passport office. And so he's gonna be able to help me out, I think. So anyway, it's good news. Cool. But it occurred to me that Judaism is kind of like a passport. It's a passport to another world that's beyond ourselves. Instead of just thinking about ourselves, it's a passport to another world, but we need to get the visa renewed every once in a while. And the way we do that is through modern interpretations and keeping up with human progress and development. That way we can get our visa stamped and we can really connect and get to that other location. So it just occurred to me, this analogy. And I'm really interested in hearing what Rabbi Kahn has to say about the Torah reading tonight for this week. And you know what I find very interesting is that Rabbi Kahn and I come from very different backgrounds, but we have a Jewish neshama and a Jewish core. So if you listen to him from an Orthodox tradition and you listen to me from, let's just say, an unorthodox tradition, you're going to hear very similar interpretations about what this passage means. Because I'm always pleasantly surprised each Tuesday to find out that our views are very, very similar in many ways. They're very different in other ways, but when it comes to Jewish ideals and values, very, very similar. Rabbi Kahn, do you notice that also? And also, I'd like you to start out, if you would, with the Torah reading.
Sometimes I definitely notice the kind of similarities or continuums, and then other times, obviously, we're approaching certain subjects on a totally different, from totally different perspectives and totally different vantage points. But yes, I think that the you put the nail right on the head when you talked about neshama. The Jewish people have a natural affinity for the Torah, and there's a connection to studying the Torah. Even if a person has never read the Torah before, I find I've spoken to people who have said, I just kind of picked it up and started reading the Torah and explaining, and they would explain certain things. I'd say, that's a beautiful insight. That's a wonderful insight. And sometimes they said things that I had learned before, and sometimes they might say things that I had never heard before, what's important, as you always say, Rabbi, is to share, for that we're getting together to discuss the Torah portion of the week and sharing ideas, and you can't go wrong. If that's what we're doing, you can't really go wrong. So,
Rabbi Kahn, are you saying that sometimes you've noticed that we have a difference of opinion on some things?
I must be mistaking this group for a different group. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Well, you are right about the Torah, though. If you go into any hotel room, you can find the Torah translated into English. So it's got to be a pretty popular bestseller with a lot of people. It is probably the most widely read literature probably in the world. So there's got to be something going for it. Go ahead, Rabbi Kahn, take it away. What's your take on the Torah Sedra for this week?
So this week's the Torah portion is called Kitisa. And the most famous or infamous incident in this week's Torah portion is, of course, the building of the golden calf, which is one of the most mystifying, bewildering, bizarre incidents I've always felt in the entire Torah. for the Jewish people who have, had the experiences that these people had to leave Egypt in a miraculous way and to come into the desert and to stand at Sinai and to experience the revelation of God in that way, and then to not very close thereafter to have this incident of the golden calf, which is such a terrible blot on their record and such a terrible blemish, such a terrible mistake and error. It's hard to understand. It requires a lot of explanation, and there are different approaches. So one approach is to say that this actual sin of the golden calf was instigated by and primarily carried out by a very, very small group of people, primarily people who were Egyptians who joined with the Jewish people when they left Egypt, and they kind of brought their connection to idolatry with them. That's one approach to understanding the story. But there's no doubt that even if that's what happened, there's no doubt that God finds the entire people blameworthy, because God says to Moses, stand aside, I'll wipe out all of these people, I'll wipe out the entire Jewish nation, and I'll start another nation from you. Of course, Moses doesn't accept that proposal and argues with God and prays and prays for forgiveness for the people until God forgives the people and they move forward in that sense. But that's kind of one approach. And then you have other people who say, no, it was many more people were involved, and discuss how this could happen and why this could happen and what exactly it was that they thought the golden calf was. Some people say the golden calf wasn't replacing God in their mind. The golden calf was like a leader to them. It was replacing Moses in their mind, which is one way of understanding the story. And others say no. Clearly, at least some of the people were viewing this as an idol, as a just like you would make a golden idol. This was a golden calf that was supposed to be a representation of the divine. So it's a very disturbing and strange and unusual incident. One, there are many takeaways away from it. One of the takeaways that I always remind myself of every year is the idea that all kinds of things can become idols to us in life. We don't worship generally in the modern world, at least in the Western world, we don't worship idols anymore. But all kinds of things can become worshiped by us. We can worship movie stars. We can worship materialism and wealth. And there's the gold of the golden calf. There's all kinds of things that we can worship and put on a pedestal, so to speak, and idolize, even if they're not actual idols. And that's a danger that I believe always exists in life. And to deal with that, we have to constantly challenge ourselves and ask ourselves, are there things in our lives that we are turning into idols, that we are idolizing, and that we shouldn't be, so to speak, ascribing the power to them that they don't deserve to have, that they don't really possess? And I think, to me, that makes it very relevant to us nowadays.
Yeah, my interpretation is very similar, of course, to yours. There's not too many different ways of interpreting what happened. It was a terrible, terrible thing that the people did. I don't know if you're aware of this, Rabbi Kahn. There's also a midrash that says it wasn't really the Egyptians, it was Antifa that was the ones who were responsible for that. They infiltrated and they instigated. You probably didn't notice that.
It's always those Antifa guys.
Yeah, that was it. They're always causing trouble. And anyway, what I think is amazing about the passage is that you have, and I just recorded the Shabbat, so it's kind of fresh in my mind. What is it in most religions that is considered the epitome of religious fervor? Something that people think is the very, very height of being religious. It's obeying God. It's following God's ways and being loyal and faithful to God. What does Moses do here? He defies God. And I would say only a Jew would have the chutzpah to defy God. And why does he defy God? Because his sense of justice and of compassion for his people transcends even his very concept of God. He can't conceive of a God who wouldn't be just. And so he's willing to challenge his view of God and God himself That's what I think is remarkable about the passage. God says, I'm going to wipe out the people. And it's very amusing the way the story runs. It's like, you know, when parents are arguing about their kids and the one parent says, look what your kids are doing. Look what your kids, all of a sudden they're your kids. So God says to Moses, it's always my people. The Jewish people are the people of God. All of a sudden it's like, look what your people are doing. You commanded them to do the right thing, and look what your people are doing. So it's really quite amusing. And then Moses does something remarkable. Instead of just following God, because God makes him an offer that most people couldn't refuse. Not only is he going to wipe out the Jews, he says, but you, Moses, I'm going to make you into a great people. I'm going to make you the progenitor of a great people. Most people would say, oh, wow, this is awesome. Moses says, no, you can't do that. He doesn't want that for himself. He says to God, no, you can't do that. Why would you want the Egyptians to be able to say, oh, you brought the Jews out of Egypt so you could slaughter them, so you could do something evil? It's really an incredible, incredible story that is told about Moses. And this is the epitome of righteousness, challenging authority, fighting for righteousness, not being intimidated, asking questions. And basically, when God says, I'm going to destroy the Jewish people for building a golden calf, Moses says, hey, don't have a cow. You know, don't make such a big deal about this. Calm down a little bit. And he calms them down a little. And then all of a sudden, everything's okay. But it's really an extraordinary passage. And then also, as my dad used to point out, the Jewish people succumbed to idolatry. They started worshiping gold instead of God. And between God and gold, there's an L of a difference. And so the Jewish people described our ancestors, warts and all. We don't try to whitewash things, and we describe them in ways that are pretty candid. Now, like you say, Rabbi Kahn, when you're looking at this passage, it's really, really hard to understand. What you have to accept in this passage, the Jews witnessed the 10 plagues of Egypt, miracles that nobody had ever seen anything like it before. And then they are liberated from Egypt after 10 plagues, and the sea parts open and they go through. And then right after that, suddenly, boom, they lose their faith. They're like, okay, we don't see God for a while. Let's go worship a calf. It's almost impossible to understand if the story literally happened that way. But if you have a view that these are this is mythology and these things didn't happen like that, then it's very simple to understand. It's just a story. So everything becomes very easy to understand if you accept that human beings wrote these stories. If you accept that these stories literally happened the way they did, then this and virtually everything in the Torah becomes virtually inexplicable. Rabbi Kahn, if you'd like, you can share some more thoughts about the Torah reading, or we could talk about what's going on today, because there is a subject. I was talking to Rabbi Kahn before. There's a subject that he and I both agreed is of significance that should be addressed. So what's your pleasure, Rabbi Kahn?
I just had one more thought I wanted to share, and it's a brief one. Right at the beginning of this week's Torah portion, there's a commandment for each individual amongst the Jewish people to bring a half shekel coin, a half shekel silver coin, for the dedication of the tabernacle of this Mishkan in Hebrew that they were commanded to build. And I really love the fact that, as the commentators point out, it's a half shekel, and you couldn't bring more. If a person came and said, I'm a lucky person, I want to give more than a half shekel, I want to give 100 shekel, for certain donations you could do that. But for this commandment, every person had to bring the exact same amount, a half shekel, which so beautifully points out that everyone's equal amongst the nation. You can't bring more, and even poor people couldn't bring less. You had to bring your half shekel, and the half shekel means to say, we need one another. We need each other. If I have my head, the best I can do is just half of the coin. I need at least another person to bring the other half of the coin. And the lesson of equality and unity and everyone working together is so beautifully represented by this half shekel coin. I just love that. Then when I went to Israel and I saw that they also have a half shekel coin, I got a big kick out of that. But of course, the half shekel coin in Israel doesn't look like a half a shekel. It looks like a coin, but it says on it half shekel. So I saved some of those for as keepsakes.
Very good. Yeah, that's known as a flat tax. They decided that every person should pay the same. And I agree with you. I think that is a really beautiful concept. I like your interpretation of it about a half shekel. And you know why the Jews had to wander for 40 years in the desert? It wasn't only that Moses was a guy and he wouldn't ask for directions. It's because the Jews, when they worshiped the golden calf, Moses realized it was a lot easier to get the Jews out of Egypt, which wasn't an easy trick, than to get Egypt out of the Jews. And the Jews, it took them 40 years to have the Jews decaffeinated. It was a very, very long process. So that's why it took so long. Now, I also wanted to share with Rabbi Kahn a discussion of something in the news. I know one person that has read about this. So I'm curious to get his input. That's Harris Friedman, because Harris Friedman is our resident expert on Israel. And Israel was the butt of a joke on Saturday Night Live, which you've probably heard about, in which one of the news commentators says, you know, half of Israel has been vaccinated with the COVID-19 vaccine. I'm guessing it's the Jewish half. Oh my goodness, he received such a backlash from that. People said it's anti-Semitic. People said this is horrible. Other people said, what are you talking about? It's only a joke. What's the big deal? And there's a lot of controversy around it. Some major Jewish organizations came out and condemned it. I'm interested in hearing from Rabbi Kahn, and I'm also interested in hearing everybody else's point of view on this subject. So Rabbi Kahn, go right ahead. What are your thoughts on that?
I think one of the tremendous misconceptions about Israel and the world, and it's one that some people, I believe, cling to intentionally, and because even though they really know it's not true, they like to use it, is this idea that anything that happens in Israel, there's a split between the Jews and the non-Jews, or between the Jews and the Arabs. And people aren't aware of the fact, or they choose to forget the fact that Israel has a very large population of Israeli Arabs who are full citizens of the state and have full rights in every way in the state. They have, of course, they have all of the rights that we take for granted: the right to vote, the right of due process, the right of being protected in the law, and they're represented in the Knesset, in the parliament. Actually, in these past elections, the number of Arab members of parliament in Israel went, I think, to its highest point in the history of the country. So, and of course, these people had the right to receive the vaccinations the same way that any other citizen of the state, Jewish or any other religion, was able to receive the vaccination. The issue that did come up in Israel, that is a real issue and was a real question, was what to do about the Palestinians in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. Because there you're dealing with populations in the Gaza Strip, especially, you're dealing with a population that Israel has no connection to. The Gaza Strip is controlled by Hamas, and Israel. If Israel ever said we'd like to come in and vaccinate them, Hamas would meet them with firearms. There's not even the possibility of vaccinating them. In terms of the West Bank, you have a good, positive relationship, or at least a working relationship between the Palestinian Authority that runs the West Bank communities, Palestinian communities, and the Israeli government. And there's all kinds of mutual programs that they work on. But my understanding, at least, is that the Palestinian Authority made the decision to say, we will handle this ourselves. We don't want to get the vaccinations from you. We don't want you coming in here to vaccinate our people. We will work this out. And my understanding is that they are making arrangements and that different countries are supporting that effort on their behalf to get the vaccinations. But the main point is, for Saturday Night Live, or for anyone really, to even if they call it a joke, to say that Israel only benefits the Jews and only cares about the Jews, and to ignore completely the citizenship of the Israeli Arabs and also any other non-Jews. There are many non-Jews of different groups and varieties that are citizens, full-fledged citizens of Israel, I think is a travesty.
So you think that joke should not have been told, and you probably don't even think it should be considered a joke, right?
You know, people who I used to watch Saturday Night Live in the old days. It's been a long time. I don't even really find it humorous that much anymore. But I would say sometimes you have to be very careful with your jokes, and even I think even people with inside the Saturday Night Live world might, now that this has come up, say, wow, we didn't realize that we were stepping on such a live wire by making what we thought was an innocent joke. I really have to believe that some of them regret it.
So it sounds like you think they shouldn't have used it. And now that they did, they should apologize.
Oh, I think they should issue some kind of apology, some kind of retraction. I do. Yeah. I don't think they would.
Yeah. Your view and mine is very similar. I think the joke, if you want to call it that, shouldn't have been told. And I think that we should not view this in a vacuum. We shouldn't view it like they were telling a joke about Norway or about Mexico or about Yugoslavia. I mean, this is a joke about a country that has been subjected to vilification ever since the country was established. And the Jewish people have been subjected to anti-Semitism for 2,000 years. We cannot look at this, I'm gonna call it a joke, in a vacuum. There are people who are very anti-Semitic, and this joke created a false impression, and an anti-Semitic false impression. Like you say, Rabbi Khan, if you're an Arab, a Muslim, a Christian, and you live in Israel, you are treated with dignity and respect, and you would have had access to the vaccine. And it should be noted, how many Jewish people live in Gaza? How many Jewish people live in Syria or Egypt? And if they do live there, how are they treated? I mean, the abysmal, vicious treatment towards Jews compared to the way Arabs and Muslims are treated in Israel is such a stark contrast that to tell a joke like that and to leave an impression like the Jews are treating Palestinians wrong. I think somebody from Saturday Night Live should come on the air and say, we told the joke, we tell a lot of jokes, we've looked into the situation, and here's what the truth is. The truth is that the only Arabs in the world that are free live in Israel. The only place that a Muslim woman is treated with equality and dignity is in Israel. And so we regret that we told this. And the truth is that the Muslims in Israel have been vaccinated to the same extent as everybody else. And the only reason why they aren't in Gaza is because, like you say, Rabbi Khan, if we set foot in there to try to vaccinate them, we'd be shot. And the Palestinian Authority told us they want nothing to do with us because they don't trust us and they want to do it on their own. And it should also be pointed out that Israel treats Muslims and Arabs with some of the best medical care, including the refugees from Syria, who nobody wants anything to do with, who find refuge from Israeli doctors and hospitals. I think they have an absolute moral obligation to say it. And I think that it shouldn't just be Jewish people that are telling them that. It should be the conscience of the country and the world should tell them to tell the truth about this. That's my opinion. I'd love to hear others. So why don't we open it up to everybody else? Either comment on that or the Torah reading or anything else you want. Go ahead, Sharon.
So I was listening to NPR the other day, and there was a young woman on there who is an Arab woman, and she is in school in Orlando. I believe I have this right. It was a Florida. I think it was UCF. She's and she just got a fellowship. And I guess she's from the Gaza. She's from the Gaza Strip, and she's going to go back there on this fellowship that she just got. And she was talking on NPR about Israel and about how Israel is not in compliance with giving the vaccine to the Palestinians that live in the Gaza Strip. And she said that they're not getting vaccinated. Israel has clout, and they've got all this clout to buy all these vaccines from around the world at a reduced price or whatever, but the Palestinians don't have that kind of clout. And she basically was bad-mouthing Israel. You're muted, Barry, by the way. Okay. And she was bad-mouthing Israel about not giving the vaccines to the Palestinians in Gaza because they have the clout and they should be using their clout to get the vaccinations for the Palestinians in Gaza. And that was on NPR News. And it really made me sad to hear that. And she was a young woman, I would say somewhere in her 30s or late 20s or something like that. So it's not just Saturday Night Live. And it's funny because I turned it off and I didn't hear that remark. I turned it off too early. So I would have been appalled at that remark too. So
what were you sad about? The Palestinian making the comment, or that NPR didn't refute it or didn't try to correct the
I mean,
record?
they were just taking it as on her word, you know, that, oh yeah, that's right. Yep. Israel's at fault here. And Israel's wrong for not sharing these vaccines or the clout to buy these vaccines at a reduced amount. They should pass that along to the Palestinians. She did say that the Palestinians wanted to take ownership of their own people to give the vaccines to, but that they didn't have the kind of money or clout that Israel has. And she said they should share that with us. So, you know, that really, that bothered me. And this comment that was done on the news segment of Saturday Night Live bothers me too. And yes, I agree. They should retract it. I would think that, I think his name is Lorne Michaels. I would think that he would walk out before Saturday Night Live starts next week and he would say a retraction because I think he's Jewish too.
Yeah, it shouldn't just be a retraction. I mean, they should correct the record and say what Israel does towards the Arabs who live there and that they're treated with dignity and equality. But obviously, they're not going to do that. These people, most of these comedians and folks, they're either anti-Semitic or they're passively anti-Semitic. They're not going to do stuff like that. Nobody's ever told the straight truth about Israel. You don't get it on certainly on MSNBC or CNN. Fox News does a pretty good job of getting the record straight on Israel. I'll give them that. But even they don't say the whole thing. But you're not going to get it from anybody else. And it is shameful that NPR would allow that to happen. Of course, the Palestinians are very hostile towards Israel, but NPR should know better. Who else?
Maybe Harris wants to speak up about this.
I'm sure he does. Go ahead, Harris. What do you think about all this?
I think we need to unmute everybody, don't we?
They can unmute themselves. I just muted them while we were talking.
Got it.
So Harris, let's put it on gallery view. And
well, I read the Beirut newspaper every morning, and they really blast Israel about not taking care of the Palestinians with the virus. And in some cases, they might be right. But going back to knocking Israel with that joke, I haven't heard any jokes about any other nation in maybe 20 years. This is the first time that I've heard anything come out about any nation. I don't think anybody would dare put down a nation. And they made a grave error, I think. But I think the Israelis could be a little nicer to the Palestinians. That's my opinion.
Interesting.
I think the Israelis, in some instances, could be nicer too, but this isn't one of them. This is just misrepresentation and it's lies.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's, I think the Jewish community should speak up, but hopefully non-Jews would also. Who else wants to share a thought on this one?
Oh boy.
Go ahead, Emily. You look like you're
she looks like she's itching.
The whole thing.
You don't want to hear what I have to say.
We always want to hear what you have to say.
I thought it was funny. I thought, don't take us everything so seriously. And as far as the vaccine goes, everyone in the world has screwed up the administration of this vaccine. Every state in the world has screwed up this. We have to take life a little bit lighter. Okay. And just to quickly change the subject, when I was a freshman in college, it was a state university in Massachusetts, UMass Salem. Anyway, I was in an ancient history class with 29 Catholic Italian boys and myself. And the old professor, a woman named Edna McGlynn, stood up and gave us a scientific explanation of why the Red Sea parted. And I thought that all of these 29 Catholic boys were going to fall off their seats, because it was the first time anybody had ever tried to explain any biblical thing scientifically. She had a very good thing with the phases of the moon and the rushes and the whole thing. So I just thought I would say that, Rabbi Barry, there have been people who have tried to explain the Torah scientifically for years and years and years. And we not take ourselves so seriously.
There are many people that try to explain the Torah scientifically, and the efforts are laughable if you actually know science. I mean, to try to explain the parting of the Red Sea like it's the phases of the moon. I mean, most of us have some experience with the moon, and we know that the moon doesn't operate to split open a sea. I mean, these things are just nonsensical and ridiculous. But
at least what she was saying was, don't take it all so literally.
No, I think she was saying the opposite.
Take it as a lovely story with the moral of it. Oh, I didn't think so. I thought she was saying, you know, all of you people who take whatever is written in the Bible literally, this didn't happen. And she was trying to give whether it was the right scientific explanation or not, it was questioning the veracity of the story.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. There's different ways that people try to explain these things. Right. One way is like what you're saying, Emily. They're saying God didn't really do it. This could have been explained by natural causes, and therefore the Torah, which is saying God did it, is not correct. So you're right. Some people use science to try to explain it in a natural rather than a supernatural way. But other people try to say, no, God actually did this, and he manipulated nature, but with the moon to make it all happen. So I don't know what her bent was, but you're right. But I will take issue with you about the joke. Yes. Okay. So first of all, I'm not one to hesitate about telling jokes. Okay. I tell jokes about anything. Just tonight, I mentioned that Moses said to God, the golden calf, don't have a cow. So if I could make fun of God and this very serious situation, I'll joke about pretty much anything. Okay. So there's not much that's off limits for me, other than like the Holocaust or stuff like that. But the reason I have an issue with this is because the Jewish people have been subjected to anti-Semitism for a few thousand years. Today, anti-Semitism is kind of taboo. So now it's kind of like embarrassing to criticize Jews after the Holocaust. So what do? They do the next best thing. We can't criticize Jews, we'll criticize the Jewish state. Israel has been made a pariah, and they say horrible things about Israel in the UN and all over the place because that's now acceptable. So this joke plays upon something that's really significant. Most people, the anti-Semites and others, think Israel is mistreating Arabs. And in actuality, it's the opposite. The Arabs are treated better in Israel with more freedom than in other countries, especially if you're an Arab woman.
Yes.
And so this joke is setting up something that feeds into a stereotype that's very hostile towards Israel, and Israel's fighting for its self-defense. Right now, Israel could be taken off the map any day now by hostile enemies. So it's not like if somebody criticizes me and makes fun of me, okay, I can take it. You criticize Israel, jokes and words sting, and they can have effect. Israel.
Okay, if the joke were told by a Jewish man instead of by a black man, Michael Che and Colin Jost, would it have been different? If it had been this way, it was told by a black man who talks a lot and jokes a lot about anti-black prejudice, and and Michael Che and Colin Jost, who just does political stuff. If it had been a Jewish man, would it have been any easier to take?
Well, first of all, he doesn't tell jokes making fun of blacks.
No.
He tells jokes making fun of people who make fun of blacks to defend the black people. If he ever made a joke making fun of black people and supporting racists who have an issue with blacks, he would have been probably taken off the air.
Yeah.
But now if he's criticizing Israel, it's just, hey, that's just a joke. And by the way, I don't think it matters who told the joke. I don't care if he's Jewish or non-Jewish or whatever. But if a Jewish guy told it, it would be worse for the Jews and for Israel, because it would say, look, even the Jews admit that they're mistreating Palestinians. I think it's a lie, and I think that they should correct it. I think it's a dangerous joke. It is possible for a joke to be both funny and harmful at the same time. In fact, when something is funny, it makes it even more harmful because people get a good laugh about anti-Zionism or anti-Semitism. And if it's not funny, it doesn't have the same bite to it. So I think that.
Quick other thing. Dr. Seuss was written by a Jewish man. And now they're banning a lot of the Dr. Seuss books because of supposed prejudice. Did you see that?
I just saw that before, and I think that's absolutely ridiculous. This is cancel culture going too far. Dr. Seuss. I mean, that's crazy.
Thank you.
Yeah, today is Read America Day. and they said it on the radio that you shouldn't be reading Dr. Seuss books to your kids. They said that this morning. Yep.
And Huckleberry Finn and Mark Twain, you can't read these things either. I think this is way over the top.
Don't buy Mr. or Mrs. Potato Head either.
Oh, they're changing
why
the name.
Mr. Potato Head?
They're changing the name. They're putting on in fine print at the bottom of the box, Mr. and Mrs. because could have a gender issue.
Isn't that crazy?
Gender issue with Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head. You know what I think we should do? I think all the Jewish people, and of course I'm being sarcastic, maybe when we went out and burnt buildings and destroyed businesses and created riots in neighborhoods, maybe then, they would pay attention. It works for everybody else. I watch television sometimes and I see a program on that I refuse to watch, and nobody has ever said anything about it. It was called Hogan's Heroes. And they made fun of Nazis, like Nazis are easygoing, gentle buffoons, when it was really, the fact that it stayed on for so many years and not one single Jewish organization, not one single politician, not one single religious leader I have ever heard mount a protest to that. Okay. Yeah. So what's the difference? I mean, everybody's going to lay down and let them walk over you. That's what's happening. I mean, it's happened for years and nobody's ever done anything about it.
Yeah.
So why should today be Manish Tanach Halayla Hazeh?
Valerie, do you know that LeBeau was actually a Holocaust survivor?
No.
LeBeau, yeah. He's either a Holocaust survivor or the child of Holocaust survivors. And of course, that show they're not making fun of Jews, they're making fun of Nazis. But I agree with you, Valerie, that it's not anti-Semitic by any means, but it creates an impression like these guys were just really easygoing type of people, and it kind of makes them look almost likable, and it kind of makes it look like the Jews really could have got out if they wanted to. And it's by today that show would never ever be on the air.
I'm sorry, it's on Memory TV and it plays every single night.
Oh yeah, I know.
Carol Burnett.
And you know what the station says about it? MeTV. They say, "I know nothing."
There you go. That's what I said. Let's burn a few buildings down and destroy some businesses and neighborhoods. Maybe they'll pay attention. And as far as what's going on in the UN, as far as going on with all these misnomers, where are your political leaders to set the record straight? They're nowhere to be found. All of your wonderful elected officials who really have the pulpit, the bully pulpit, to set the record straight, do nothing. They have their heads where the sun don't shine. Congratulations. Let's elect some more of them while we're at it.
Hey, Valerie, I'm with you. There's like very little or no comments from politicians about this joke or anti-Semitism or anti-Israel stuff. All that stuff is forgotten about. You say one thing wrong about a black person and they're all over you. You say to a woman, hey, how about a kiss? You're out. Forget about it. You're done. But you say something about Israel and Jewish people and hey, no worries. I agree with you, Valerie. This is something that is, I think it's just an underlying
maybe we need
level.
to become a little bit more radicalized. It works for everybody else.
Yeah, but Valerie, if you want to burn down a building, you can't burn ours down. We don't have a building anymore.
That's right.
Now,
Gotta go somewhere else.
back to this what does everybody think about Como? Should he resign?
Yes.
Resign,
Yes.
resign,
Finito completo. Yeah.
Resign.
yes.
What do you think, Rabbi Khan? What's your moral judgment?
I haven't followed the story closely enough, but in every situation like that, I really feel that there shouldn't be, to use a term from the O.J. Simpson trial, there shouldn't be a rush to judgment, although I do believe he was guilty, O.J. Simpson. But in this case, I just think it's too easy for people to say this or that happened, and suddenly a man is, if there are other reasons why people think Como should be out, that's different. But in these incidents, I just think everybody due process. Everybody deserves a chance to defend themselves. Everybody can take things out of context. A person can say something to be cute or joke or flirtatious, and it's not necessarily enough to get a man thrown out of office. But I honestly don't know enough of the details of the stories to be.
Well, there was 3 ladies that complained about him,
So
not 1, but 3. So
What do you think, Harris? You think he should be out?
he should be out. Yes.
Well, there's an expression, what goes around comes around. He was very vociferous in the Kavanaugh hearings when there was unproven allegations against the now Justice Kavanaugh. And they were mostly were very unfounded. And Cuomo was very vociferous against, Kavanaugh. So, what goes around comes around, and now he's in the same position. Well, yeah. What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
There it goes.
I want to add one thing about Israel. Israel treats the gays, lesbians, or whatever better than any country in the Middle East. If you're in an Arab country and you're gay, they murder you.
You're done.
You're done. You're dead. In Israel, they have parades and everything. I'm not sure how the Orthodox treat them.
They
but
even
the
have a
rest of-
synagogue for the gays. It's called Gay Avec.
Oh, boy.
that's like that new magazine, Playboy.
That was a good one.
What was the new magazine? I didn't hear it.
Yeah.
No, but I wanted to say something about the equality in Israel. What he should have said is, and got it right, is that they're giving the second shot first to the non-Jews, and the Jews are getting the first shot and then the second shot. But something like that would have been funny because it didn't make any difference. I mean, if you're going to make a joke, at all. Now, I think the next people that they're going to get now is Mother Goose. I think she's coming along after Dr. Zeus and green.
I know. I heard that.
Green eggs and ham.
Her goose is cooked, from what I heard.
I think so.
She's next.
Mama
But you know what they say? What's good for the goose?
It's good for your gander. How come you can goose?
Oh, gosh.
Well, some of the most violent fairy tales are actually the Brothers Grimm. I mean, they're very violent and very vicious. They have been for
Brothers
years.
Grimm, yeah.
You know, by the way, the stories about the witches and the old lady and stuff like that, those are actually sexist stories. Those are very misogynistic, sexist stories. Like, if you're an older woman and you're not attractive, then you're like vile and you're all these terrible things. So these are pretty sexist stories. But I will tell you this, and this is coming from someone who won an award for Feminist of the Year that back in my day. I don't agree with the treatment of Cuomo, and I'll tell you why. Okay, first of all, there's huge differences in mistreatment of women. So you have people that have physically assaulted women or perhaps raped or attacked women. That's something, somebody does that, they should be history instantly. But like, for instance, what Cuomo did compared to what Trump admitted to doing is like a choir boy. So there's like double standards. Plus, half of Congress has probably done things similar. And I'm going to tell you which half, and it's not a sexist joke either. It's the male half. Okay.
Oh.
So yes. So if you look at all the sex abusers, people who commit sexual abuse, the number of men who do it is like probably 95%, and that's just fact, and because of just genetics or whatever. But there's different levels of abuse. In my opinion, if someone denies climate change, they should be taken out of office and never allowed to run again. If someone is taking money from the NRA, they should be removed from office. What he did was wrong. Okay, I'm not doubting that. What he did was wrong, but if you want to remove him from office, you need to go through all the Congress people and find out what they've all done and go through their record, and then do it in an organized way. And then also see what else they're doing. To me, taking money from bad people and being bought off is a lot worse than propositioning a woman or asking these things. What he did was wrong, but there's a kind of mentality. It's kind of like a herd mentality, like they're just piling on. What is it that he did? Like he's at a wedding and he puts his hands on someone and then tries to kiss her. This is boorish and this is wrong, and this is, I don't know, maybe it's even, you could even charge him with it. But I'm not so sure that and asking someone about whether they like dating older men, I don't know if that automatically disqualifies you to hold office. To me, there's people in politics who do far worse things with far worse ramifications than what he did. I'm not saying it's right, he was wrong. The guy's an idiot. But whether that disqualifies him from office, I don't know. What else? Who else wants to share something about any topic?
So I wanted to ask a little bit more about the Torah portion.
Go ahead.
Kind of full circle. So what actually happened to the people? Were they punished for doing the decaffeinated act? Or
big time.
The golden act.
They were punished big time. But I think I'll let Rabbi Khan get into this because he's more into the wrath and the anger of God than I am. I'm kind of squeamish, but let Rabbi Khan just tell you what happened to these people. It wasn't a pretty sight.
No, because Charlton Heston put his hands up and there was an explosion and they fell down into a big hole.
I think that's a different parsha.
Well,
Go ahead, Rabbi Khan. Tell them what really happened. Tell them the emes.
I thought, Rabbi, you had to say the Wrath of Khan line from Star Trek, but you didn't use it. So
I blew my big chance. Okay.
So from the Torah narrative, and it looks like the main ringleaders were killed, were punished, and the all of the people. It's very unusual. The Torah says that Moses took the golden calf and had it ground up into powder, and then had the people then mix that with water and had everyone drink that. Now that is, again, this whole story is not to kill them. That wasn't intended. It wasn't like a method of killing them. Everyone who drank that powder with water survived. And so it's a kind of bizarre, mysterious punishment to a bizarre, mysterious. But
then what happens? Then what happens after that? Then Moses authorizes the Levites to take a sword and wipe out all the people that worship the golden calf.
Correct. But there's a big difference between the people who got killed were the people who actively worshiped it as opposed to anybody else who was, let's say, a spectator, or anybody else who was watching. Even if somebody was standing there and kind of saying, "Hey, this is a nice party," you had to be a worshiper to get killed. So yeah, it's true. A certain amount of people were killed, and I don't remember. The Torah says a number. I don't remember the number.
It was thousands, and then also I think there was a plague afterwards, also, just to make sure that they were properly finished off. But also, are you saying, Rabbi Khan, that makes it okay? You know, if they're worshiping a golden calf, that it's okay for them to have been slaughtered by the sword? And also, the people who did it, the Levites, how do you know? How did they know, like, who was actually worshiping the golden calf? Like, maybe somebody looked like somebody, or maybe their memory was a little bit off. Once you go slicing people up with a sword, I don't know how accurate they were to know who was actually worshiping the golden calf. I kind of have my doubts that they could have got it right. I'm sure there was no judge or jury either. And I mean, the whole story is really just appalling that somebody would be killed because they worship the wrong God.
It sounds like a dead issue.
It is.
Very good, Joe.
All right. Anybody else want to bring up any other topics? It's been a fascinating discussion.
I have some good news.
Go ahead.
Israel now has an alliance with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states to combat Iran. and they're going to work together. All the armies are going to work together. And I think that's wonderful news.
I think it's great news also. I think things are really moving in a very positive direction in Israel. And I actually received an interesting call from someone. I was exchanging views with them. Rabbi Kahn, you're probably familiar with this. The person was telling me that there was an amazing story that occurred surrounding Purim that leads them to believe that there is a God who's controlling history, and that he's writing documents. And what he told me was that it's very interesting. And I checked it out, that on Purim, it says that Haman not only was hanged, but 10 of his children were hanged. He was pretty prolific. And 10 sons were hanged. And then when it describes it in the Megillah, certain letters are written in smaller print than the other ones. I believe it was Shin, Taf, and Zion. Now, if you add up these letters that are smaller, it comes out to 707. And then one letter is bigger, it's a Vav. And if you add all that up, you get to the year in Hebrew letters, 1946. And in 1946, 10 people were hung at the Nuremberg trial. And one of them, and Nuremberg was like, Hitler was seen like a modern day Haman. And one of them, a guy named Stryker, and his last words were Purim Fest 1946, which was a prophecy from the book of Esther that these people would be hung. And he was like mesmerized and saying, there's no explanation for this. This must be like God's working through history and all of this stuff. And so I did check it out, and it is pretty intriguing. It is quite intriguing. But if you look at it, and I don't know if you studied this, Rabbi Kahn, but it's pretty interesting. You know, I'm a skeptic from day one, but even I was like, whoa, that's pretty cool. So anyway, I checked it out. It is true that the numbers add up to 707, and it's the year 707, but this 1,000 year, to make it 5707, which would have corresponded to 1946, the letter in big letters is a Vav. And usually when you write the Hebrew date, the 5, to make it 5706 would have been a Hey. And so the way they explain it is, well, Vav means it was the 5th century. That's why you got a number 6, because that indicates the 5th century. So it's pretty darn close. And it's I could see how somebody could look at that and be a believer. But I just thought it was a very intriguing coincidence that somebody found. It doesn't quite match, but it's pretty darn close. Oh, and here's the other thing that's really weird, is that when these people were sentenced at the Nuremberg trial, many of them were sentenced to execution in some other way, but only 11 people were sentenced to be hung. So you could say, well, I guess it's just a coincidence, but only 11. And one of them, I forget which one, committed suicide 2 days before. So instead of 11 people being hung, now you got 10 of them. And now 10 are hung, just like in the Megillah story. Now the line about when he says Purim Fest 1946, there's an explanation for that twofold. One, he could have been misquoted, or somebody just made it up to make it fit the prophecy. Or it could be, this is something that I found also interesting, the Nazis understood Judaism very well. They were really fascinated by Judaism and studied it, and unfortunately, they actually committed quite a few grisly atrocities, which I won't go into, on Purim. They were very familiar with Judaism, and they committed atrocities on Purim, and they were very familiar with Purim. And Hitler was actually afraid because of the story of Purim, and he forbade the reading or the teaching of anything about Purim. It was like written out of history. He wanted nothing to do with it because he was scared. So the fact that this guy would have been aware of the Purim story and said, oh, this is Purim Fest, isn't quite as bizarre as it might seem, because apparently the Nazis knew about Purim and were aware of it. But I just thought it's pretty interesting stuff. Anyway, this is a really great conversation we had tonight. I appreciate everybody coming on. It was a great exchange of views. And I think this is a great passage. I just want to leave you again with just the heights that our people achieved by venerating Moses. He stood up and defied God and was willing to sacrifice himself for his people. To me, I don't know that that actually happened, but the fact that our people would venerate someone who did that and think that it's more important to challenge authority of any type in order to save people and to bring about justice, that's a pretty darn good story and inspires me, and I hope it inspires everyone else as we learn from some great lessons from the Torah. Thanks everybody for the conversation. Great seeing you,
Thanks. Great
and I look
session.
forward to seeing you next week.